supersonic transport to cross between London and New York in only 2 hours.
This aircraft has the most jet engines I've ever seen. More than 2, more than 4, and more than 8. In fact, it has 68. Yes, you didn't hear me wrong, this has over 50 engines all burning fuel at the same time. And you're probably wondering, why so many engines? Because not only was this a Mach 2 passenger plane that flew at 60,000 feet to go between New York and London in just over 2 hours, but because it could also take off and land vertically, able to come to a halt right in the city centre and bring 44 passengers to anywhere they needed to be without an airport. And the best part is, it was British, so the tea wouldn't even been cold. The team behind this aircraft envisioned that this passenger plane would only be the beginning, with a larger 150-seater version to come and a special top-secret nuclear-powered variant that would carry twin nuclear bombs. Don't you just love the 1950s? Maybe there really was something in that tea. After all, how else would you come up with the Rolls-Royce Griffith Supersonic VTO airliner? Okay, let's get the big question out of the gate right away and talk about those engines and how exactly they worked. First, there were 12 turbojets in 2 nacelles at what could be described as the wingtips of the triangular aircraft. Although the Griffith was more of a blended wing lifty body design, it still had use for these little wingtips. They would be able to push the aircraft up from 350 miles per hour up to Mach 2.5. They were the main horizontal moving force. For VTOL operation and perhaps low-speed forward flight, the entire nacelle could actually rotate through 90 degrees to direct that jet thrust straight down. This was augmented by 56 lift jets arranged in 2 double rows of 14 on either side of the passenger cabin, which could swivel for very low speed control. And this was the main way that the aircraft would go up and down. Funnily enough, the aircraft would actually activate these 56 lift engines and then turn off the main jets as they swiveled, stalling in space at around 350 miles per hour before reacting to come to a slower speed of 20 feet a second. So imagine being a passenger on board and feeling that movement. Yikes. The resultant design was aimed to carry 44 people across the Atlantic in around 2 hours, naturally aimed at New York to London routes. But whilst this sounds amazing, when I explain the passenger cabin, you're probably gonna pause your breath. I love the idea that this plane was not only a supersonic transport, but it also had the ability to take off and land vertically without a runway. I love that this is a great example of out-of-the-box thinking. The engineering marvel didn't stop there. According to the patents, which expired in 1978 if you wanted to have a crack at it yourself, the tube pressurized aircraft cabin would be mounted within the structure of the aircraft, with the freedom for relative expansion between the cabin and the aircraft in each of the 3 dimensions. Meaning that it would be sheltered against vibrations, heat and sound for the aircraft going at such a top speed, which was an issue that plagued early supersonic aircraft such as the Soviet Supersonic Tu-144. So as we can see from the diagrams, this would be a tube that would be suspended within the triangle shape. But funnily enough, I'm unsure if there would actually be windows, as the cabin is so far from the fuselage outer edge and is deliberately kept isolated. So you're in a supersonic, hot, dark tube that stalls in the sky. Nice. There would actually be a single set of doors halfway down the tube that would reach across the gap and be used for boarding and disembarkment. The aircraft itself would be comprised of a dart-like shape with 2 fins at the rear attached to each nacelle. There was no tailplane, and all of the steering would have been done with vector nozzles. These nozzles would have got bleeding air from the engines and shot them out like a spaceship does in flight. So it was pretty darn advanced. In the nose, there was going to be a shock cone that would help deal with the forces past the sound barrier, plus an extension chamber to slow down and increase the pressure of the gas, as well as feed forward the exhaust into the nose of the aircraft as a somewhat additional VTOL jet. But there was also 2 tubes that ran forward to the tip of the nose, where the exhaust was ejected outwards and forwards to create a bow shockwave. Yes, that's not in but out, with the hot gases deflecting to create an air shield in front of the aircraft, which is something that I haven't seen in a very long time. The cockpit itself was also located behind this nose and in front of the passenger cabin, and they have it as sort of a periscope arrangement to look out during taxi and takeoff that would then retract when it got up to speed. There would be a pilot, co-pilot, and an engineer on board. So where on earth did this design even come from, and how successful was it? A.A. Griffith was the chief scientist at Rolls-Royce when he came up with the concept. He devised that if an aircraft had a separate lift and propulsion system, it would be possible to get the best of both worlds. A vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that was also capable of supersonic flight. The idea was that this new aircraft could only work with a new lightweight engines that Rolls-Royce happened to be developing. Now hold on, if you're anything like me, you'll start to see a connection here. This was an engineer who used to work for Rolls-Royce, was proposing to Rolls-Royce to build an aircraft that used a colossal amount of Rolls-Royce engines. Yeah, you can imagine that the CEO loved the idea, and even the share price would have gone up when they heard the news. After all, the chairman of Rolls-Royce at the time was once asked why he always flew in the Atlantic on a 4-engine aircraft, and his reply was, because there are no 5-engine aircraft. But developing such an idea would actually be harder than they imagined, and the first iteration of a vertical jet engine was such a far cry from a real aircraft that it's actually kind of horrifying. Called the Rolls-Royce Thrust Measuring Rig, nicknamed the Flying Bedstead, it proved that this fancy new jet engine technology could be used to take things right up. With 2 jet engines, it was able to lift a single pilot up into the sky, although that's as far as it could go. With a practical knowledge of the concept that it would work, the team then started to develop the short SC-1 that would have 4 turbojets for vertical flight and 1 to move horizontally. This would be an actual aircraft, and unlike the test rig, it actually looked like something. With that success under its belt in 1955, A.A. Griffith pushed for his VTOL passenger jet proposal. So what happened? Surprisingly, the concept actually did gain steam, with a special committee that had been set up to see if Britain could wrestle away the aviation industry from the Americans over the North Atlantic championing the design. They proposed that the aircraft should be expanded beyond 44 passengers, but actually up to 135 passengers, and to be in service within the next 12 years. And the best part is, they were going to make the military pay for it. The committee believed that a military variant, alike to the KC-135 refueler that was being developed by Boeing as the military version of the Boeing 707, would actually allow this aircraft to be completed in record time. By using a military testing program, the new supersonic aircraft could get hundreds of hours without costing a single dime to airlines or to the Rolls-Royce company, all paid by the British taxpayer. And you know that I've come to the table with the actual military design that they proposed. It was called the RAE, Conceptual Low Altitude Tactical Bomber, and it would have 32 lift jets, 12 for propulsion, like the Griffith, and also carry 2 nuclear bombs. It would also be nuclear powered, so it would be effectively able to fly for days at a time. Although most other nuclear powered concepts use jet fuel for the actual takeoff and landings, we're unsure if the VTOL on this aircraft was using nuclear fuel or jet fuel. With these 3 concepts under their wings and an actual prototype flying aircraft, what happened? Why didn't this Rolls-Royce aircraft take off into the sky? Well, the committee also proposed that not only should there be a supersonic transport, but there should also be large lumbering nuclear-powered cargo planes that would carry freight around the world subsonically at a much slower speed, pretty much being cargo ships of the air. Say, for example, with 4 Rolls-Royce engines and a large hump for the cockpit so the main door could open. But what the committee didn't expect is that airlines would look at this conceptual 4-engined large aircraft and decide that a larger passenger number would be more profitable than what passengers would be willing to spend at flying at speed. And thus, economically, the project didn't make any sense. And as we know from history, airlines would actually choose the lumbering 747 over the Concorde. Although don't be sad, because we know that the team would actually go on to work on the Concorde, so very likely all of this work done by Rolls-Royce was wrapped into that project. But I do have to wonder in this day and age if this project was even that real. Maybe this was just a ploy by the lifted jet engine manufacturers, such as Rolls-Royce, to make them very rich. Because you can imagine if those tens and thousands of 737s and Airbus A320s that fly around the world had batteries of lift jets, that these old timers in England would be very rich indeed. But that's going to have to be a video for another day. Thanks for watching.